Okay, Dad, happy Monday. Today is July 8th. And I thought maybe we can start this conversation off by asking you whether or not you think Kamala Harris will end up being president before the November election. Do you think that? And because I think this is actually a big question. I think
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
we're
I know, because it. I think there's at least even odds that she will be. I mean, it sounds like there is a concerted push, a concerted effort on the part of the mega donors and the media to get Biden out of there. And it looks like
okay.
she's the only. It's not their first choice. I don't. Again, this is just a mess the Democrats created for themselves. Um, she is not a very likable person, or or at least let's be. What matters here is that she's just not. She's never been a very popular candidate. Like during the primaries, I don't think she won a single delegate. She never got more than something like 2% of the vote in the various primaries. She really flopped. So she's not. I'm sure she's not the Democrats' first choice, so she wouldn't be, but they just don't have a choice now. There's really no easy way to replace Biden, with somebody other than her. If he steps down, then she automatically becomes president. That's the way it works.
Do you think the world would be a safer place or a more dangerous place if she was president?
It's hard to say. I don't know if it really will change things very much. Who knows? She probably, will end up with the same people. I imagine she'll have the same team around her, at least through the end of Biden's term. If she somehow gets elected, she might change things. Now you get the sense that she's really in over her head. I mean, I know doesn't like to hear this, but I think she, in truth, is a DEI hire. Somebody who was selected to just tick the race gender box.
I don't
She
even think
has,
that's very controversial to say that. I mean,
yeah.
that's, I
Well,
mean, Biden
in
just said
certain
that
quarters,
outright.
right? Yeah.
He said, I'm going to choose a black woman
Well,
as
good
my
point.
VP.
Right.
That's,
Yeah. So basically, he said, "I'm going to make a DEI hire."
right.
Right. That's true. But then you're not supposed to repeat it, or shine a spotlight on it. Yeah, I don't think she's a very capable person, very competent. So she'll probably, just trust the advice of those people around her, and that may mean that things really don't change very much. Now, there's always the chance that she'll want to assert herself. It's like get the sense like you're looking down on me because I'm a woman or something, and then do something to demonstrate her authority, and that there's always a possibility that that kind of psychology could kick in, and with rather serious consequences for the world. But I think most likely, we won't see any significant changes in policy.
But if there is a
Certainly over the next.
change,
I don't
then you
know.
think the
I don't know
change,
what she thinks. Yeah,
but you think that it's like, if there is a change, then it's probably, if you're a betting man, that it would be for the worse. Because I had those assumptions as well, that, she might feel compelled to leave her mark as the first female president. And she's inheriting such a mess. That the Democrats have made. Like, if it was any other time, I wouldn't really be that concerned. But we're in the middle of,
right.
of such a tense situation in the Middle East that really requires finesse, somebody that's really experienced and someone that's able to deal with Israel and won't be manipulated by Netanyahu. And then obviously we have a very volatile, tense situation in Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you have a new commander in chief, somebody that nobody's really looked at in terms of her. I don't know where she really stands on these
Right.
issues. I imagine she just stands with the rest of Anthony Blinken and the cadre of the State Department that has been put in by Biden. But I've also heard that her and Biden don't really get along, and she may want to clean house and do things her own way and be more assertive.
Right.
I guess I would just say that we won't dive too far into this because it's all
Yeah.
speculation.
Right.
But it just adds another level of uncertainty in a time
Yeah.
where we don't want uncertainty.
Yeah. Right.
That it's such a crazy time that we're involved in all these very dangerous conflicts that could go horribly wrong, and there's just really nobody captaining the ship. And the person that might captain the ship, we have no idea what her credentials are or what she might do.
Right.
It's
And
such
she
a
probably,
gamble.
right, she probably doesn't have any idea either. That's the thing. No, I think you actually put it perfectly. I think you put your finger on it. Yeah, the problem is that, we just have more uncertainty on top of uncertainty. And this is
Right.
the time
It's
for
like
a firm
I almost-
hand and for experience, and we don't have that. We just don't have that.
Right. I think it's a sorry state of affairs if I feel like things would be better just to keep the dementia president in, because we've been operating with that for a while. I kind of know what to expect. I mean, even Putin made that comment earlier on that says he prefers Biden to Trump because Biden is predictable. He understands this is the political machine, and that's what he understands.
Right. He may be predictably terrible, but he's predictable. I mean, I think Putin and his government know what to expect from him. And I don't really have anything to add to that. Right.
That's fine. We don't have to dive in. Well, seeing how we're just mentioning a little bit about Ukraine and Putin, we can just dive into some breaking news that I just saw today, and I believe you saw today as well, is this attack on the Kiev's Children's Hospital. I haven't been able to dive and do the research. I'm leaving that for you. But basically what I was seeing on Twitter is that they're saying a Russian missile struck a children's hospital in the middle of Kiev, killed at least 17, injured 40 plus more. There are some other people on Twitter saying that it was a Patriot missile or a U.S. missile. Another one, they're saying it's a Kinzhal Russian missile. Now, my immediate reaction to this is, well, of course, that this is horrible. Civilians dying is just a horrific thing. But it just immediately raised alarm bells in my head that this doesn't make sense. If anybody that's been following the war closely knows that Russia is dominating on the battlefield now. There's very little resistance. They have complete air superiority. There's no reason really for them at all to strike children's hospital.
Well, there was never a reason for them to do that. But,
there was never, and we've seen that they've really gone out of their way to try to minimize civilian casualties because Russia knows how it can be used against them. Anything that happens, the Western media is going to run with it to try to justify, more money to Ukraine, NATO expansion, to beat the war drums against Russia even louder. Yeah. So.
I mean,
it doesn't make any sense. I'm sure it wasn't the Russians, but maybe it could have been. If it was the Russians, it could have been unintentional. So, anyways, I'll let you take it from there and tell me your analysis of the situation.
Yeah. Well, you could say the notion that the Russians intentionally targeted a children's hospital, I think, is just beyond absurd. We've been following these missile attacks for months and months, and they're very methodical. They go after certain kinds of infrastructure, for example, military and energy infrastructure. So they went after power plants. Earlier, they went after substations. They go for factories or sometimes military, assembly points or transportation hubs. But everything has a military purpose and is meant to weaken the military-industrial complex of Ukraine. And we've seen this. So today you're saying they got up and they decided, well, we're going to go after a few substations because apparently some substations were hit in Kiev. And then also a factory, very large factory, was just utterly obliterated. I mean, there's some very dramatic footage out there. You can see, I think it was struck by 5 KH-101 cruise missiles, and which deliver a very, very large explosive payload, 800 kilograms. And so you're saying that they went after this, this large factory. They went after these, they struck these substations, and then they decided also to hit a children's hospital. I mean, it just, on the face of it, it's absurd. It's just not what they do.
Like, we got an extra missile lying around. Let's send this one off.
Right. I mean, it's just not. Now, there are, I think there are some people, to be honest, on the Ukraine side that actually think that way. People like, who just delight openly, talk about just how they love to kill Russians. And when Russian civilians die, they celebrate. And you see that in Ukraine. There are people like that, but I've seen no signs that there's anybody like that, within the Russian command structure. Yeah, I think what happened. Well, first of all, if it had in fact been struck by, for example, one of these KH-101 missiles, which seems to be the predominant missile that they used in this strike, that whole hospital would have been destroyed. Again, you can see the footage of what happened to some of these other buildings that were hit. They were just obliterated. But I've seen many pictures of the outside of this hospital, and you can see that it's pockmarked. It looks like it's been kind of like hit by scattershot. And, apparently it was shrapnel. Something blew up outside of it. And what the Russians are saying, and I think others are, that it was, in fact, a Patriot missile that hit. Now, of course, I don't think the Ukrainians did this intentionally either. They were trying to, strike one of these incoming Russian missiles. It missed and ended up hitting the hospital.
This has happened before, right?
Yeah.
Where a Patriot missile has struck,
right?
Failed
and
to intercept.
S-300 missiles too. It happens, and that's that's a sad. It's clearly accidental. It's not intentional on the part of either party. It's just a sad fact of war that these sort of things happen.
Okay. Do you think? Well, okay. If it was a Patriot missile, do you think that will come out in Western media? Do you think that there will ever be an acknowledgement that, or will they just run with like the propaganda that this was a Russian missile and we're sticking by it? Because you can see the Twitter space really pumping that hard, right, and trying to do everything they can to.
I bet that you'll find it, like you'll find in the back pages of the New York Times sometime down the road that this, these things do come out usually, but they're in the back pages. And they're not trumpeted. You have to be the kind of very dedicated kind of reader to find them. But the headlines, are either going to claim, directly claim or imply that somehow this was an intentional Russian attack. And I've seen plenty of those headlines already.
Right. So how can you say with confidence then that this was a Patriot missile?
Well, I don't know enough about these. People will look at it. They say that the shape of it, whatever it was, is consistent with that of a Patriot missile. I can't make any judgment on that.
So when you say
I don't
people,
know, but
you're
I
just...
would, but it seems clear that no matter what, this was not an intentional. First of all, I mean, like I was saying, you just kind of analyze the motivations and the history the Russians have. And they have a long history. It's not like they only occasionally get a missile across the border. This is almost a daily occurrence. They've been, doing this for months and months, years. I think it was in 2023, they fired 4,000 missiles into Ukraine. So, they know what they're doing, and we have a history to look at, the kind of things that they've struck again and again. And I'm sorry, they don't go after children's hospitals. So I think, first of all, we can say there's just no reason to believe that this is what they're trying to get. But then second, whatever hit it, was not either blew up some distance from it or, was not carrying the, kind of destructive explosive warhead that a Russian missile would be carrying, because those do so much more damage. And you can just see, look at the footage of several other strikes, and it's just nothing like what you see. There are broken windows, there are pock marks, there's clearly a lot of shrapnel went flying. Apparently, again, and this is from Ukrainian sources, they show these, they look kind of like little cubes. And apparently that's something that's in the payload of a Patriot missile, because it does, when it explodes, it sends out the scatter shot to the purpose is, of course, is try to hit the incoming missile, and if it's not to an air defense missile doesn't carry a very explosive warhead. It's not trying to blow up a building or penetrate to a bunker. It's just trying to, one way or another, hit this incoming missile, and it does that with this kind of prefabricated shrapnel. According, again, I can't judge the veracity of it because I don't know enough about these missiles. But, according to certain analysts, they said that, they found evidence of just that, on the ground around this hospital.
Okay, so a Patriot missile, then how it works, it doesn't actually hit an incoming missile. It explodes and releases this shrapnel.
Well, I think it certainly can.
It,
but, it certainly makes a lot of sense that you want to try to expand
Right.
that the range of it, because okay, this missile's coming in real fast, and if you're just limited to a direct hit, that's going to be very hard to do. Two fast-moving objects, hitting each other. Imagine two bullets striking each other in the air. But if you can explode within, when you know that it's coming at you, and
right, just a buckshot kind of thing, just
something will hit it, and of course, traveling at a high speed, that can be enough to destroy it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, this is I have a limited understanding of these things, but that's how I understand it.
Okay, well, we'll see the fallout from this. I imagine it might be kind of similar like what we saw when Ukraine said that Russia launched missiles into Poland, and then we found out that no, these were actually Ukrainian interceptor missiles.
Well, I think that was a little difference, and the reason is that Ukraine was trying to trigger Article 5, of NATO, and try to bring in Poland and the rest of NATO. And NATO did not want that to happen. So they actually pretty quickly shut that down and said that's not true. And so, but in this case, we're going to badmouth the Russians, or we're going to slander them. We're going to accuse them of being monsters. Oh, yeah, we're all for that. Maybe we know among ourselves that it's not possible that this is what they did, but let's, that's part of our program here is to slander Russians.
What is the popularity of NATO right now in Europe? Is it rapidly declining? So I've been seeing a lot of basically propaganda, NATO, a lot of NATO fluff pieces going out, just talking about how great NATO is. But I imagine that they got to be pretty scared because, first of all, they don't know if Biden's even in charge anymore, and that he's going to leave. And Trump is talking about maybe just getting rid of NATO. You got Marine Le Pen making moves, and then you have people like Nigel Farage that are all these populist candidates are starting to say, "Hey, NATO is the problem, not the solution."
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what do you think is the opinion of most Europeans right now of NATO? Are they happy about it?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to first turn on the fan because I'm starting to sweat. It's kind of hot. Just a second, real quick.
Go for it.
Okay, yeah. I haven't seen opinion polls recently on attitudes towards NATO, but it's clear that opposition to or willingness to use NATO to fight against Russia is close to zero. It's very little. There's very few people in Europe that actually support that, maybe outside of the Baltic states and Poland, but I bet even there it's a pretty small minority. And that's, we can get into the French elections later, but one of the reasons, it seems to me, for the collapse in Macron's popularity, he's become just toxic, within France, is his effort to, his all his talk about sending French troops to Ukraine. Okay, that's not NATO per se, but it's all part of the same project, and so yeah. I think maybe you would find people like supporting NATO in the abstract, but when you talk about ever using Article 5, there's really no willingness to do that.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to dive into with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, or should I throw something else at you?
Throw something else at me.
Okay, well, this is more just diving into how to know if these numbers are true. So I've been hearing, I saw on Twitter that The Economist had an article that they said something like 400 to 750,000 Russians have died in this war.
Right.
And I didn't actually read The Economist article itself, but I saw a lot of people on Twitter reposting it and saying this.
Right.
And then, for the longest time, we've had the report that the number of Gazans that died was around 37,000, and was just kind of stuck there for a long time. And then just today or yesterday, the Lancet Medical Journal has said that they think that the number is now 186,000, which is to me more believable. But these numbers are so important in controlling the narratives of these wars now, and people will latch onto a number or an article and just state it over and over again, and it's like, how do you know it's true? And then it just got me thinking, like, whenever I look at the history books, I was really into World War II, World War One as a kid, Civil War, and you can always see like, these are the belligerents, and these are, and you can see the losses on each side, how many killed and wounded.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, if we can get those numbers back in 1863, and I thought that they were accurate, like how come we can't get these numbers now? Are we just in the fog of war, so both sides are just going to be producing this, and we will get the true casualty numbers when it's all over? Or what do you make of all this stuff coming out?
Okay, well, first on Ukraine. Yeah, no, I've seen there's a lot of claims of, very high Russian casualty and killed in action. Again and again, I'm seeing like they're losing 1,000 or 1,500 a day. Clearly this is simply, it's not based on anything as far as I can tell, other than Ukraine propaganda. Again, we've talked about this earlier. There is one project that does try to keep very close tabs on how many Russians have been killed in action over the course of this conflict.
Zona, right?
Media Zona, BBC. Okay, right. BBC, no friend of the Russian government. Same with Media Zona. Media Zona is a Russian NGO, but it is anti-Putin. But they, again, we talked about this. They scour the records, the obituaries, the news stories. They go to cemeteries, and I just checked on it just a few days ago. Went to their website, and they had a total of 58,000 confirmed deaths. And then, maybe even more importantly, in contradiction to what these recent claims are, that Russians are now losing something like 1,000 a day. It looks like Russian losses are about as low as they have been throughout the conflict. There have been times, for example, during the Bakhmut battle, when Russian casualties spiked, when the Wagner organization was, using, tactics that were perhaps a little bit more reckless than what the Russian standard military uses. But that was, there was one spike. There was a spike at the beginning, like in February, March in 2022. But over the last several months, it's actually been about as low as they've been throughout the conflict, much below 1,000 a month. So that's that. I think that's really the only thing that we can go to if we're going to, if you're going to talk about reality. Okay, this is reality. This is what they've been able to find, and there's no evidence that there has been some sort of surge in Russian casualties. And then I think the second thing to do is just to think about, what's happening here. What advantages the Russians have over the Ukrainians. They have total air dominance. They have a huge advantage in artillery. And historically, like most casualties actually are caused by artillery. Something like 80%, are actually caused by artillery or bombs, rather than bullets. Now, with this huge advantage, and everybody admits that this advantage exists, I think it's, even if the Russians are attacking, but they're not attacking rapidly. It's clear they're not being reckless. They're moving incrementally. You would expect casualties to be much higher on the Ukrainian side. And, the Ukrainians just don't have the firepower to inflict the same kind of casualties on the Russians. And if the Russians are careful, right, they don't use human wave tactics. They've been accused of doing that, but nobody's provided any kind of video evidence of it. And I think this is completely a fabrication. It's total fiction. From what we know, what everybody even admits on both sides, you would expect casualties to be much higher on the Ukrainian side. Now, we can go over to Gaza unless you want to ask something more about that.
Well, I was just going to say, why would The Economist write an article like this if it, what's their incentive? Are they being paid by the government? Is there a certain amount of funds to produce this type of data to keep the Ukrainian war narrative going, to keep funding going for narrative? Like, it's supposed to be The Economist was something that, I studied economics in college. It was I
It's a
always looked up
serious
to
journal,
that magazine.
right? You know,
Right. That's how always what I thought. It's a serious
right?
journal. It's like I didn't think that it would. Why would it just
Yeah.
fabricate things? And actually, one of the sources in there they have is Mediazona as well, but along with other things. So maybe they just added up all the numbers and got the highest number they could come up with.
Right.
But yeah, just well, why?
Well,
Why?
it's
How
long
does
been
that happen?
it's been a neoconservative magazine. It's long been very Russophobic, so it's very closely aligned, you know, with the globalists and the Russia haters. So there's just kind of a predisposition to to see bad things about Russia. This is something that I think we find in The Economist going way back. You would think that, again, a serious journal would do serious journalism, but that's just not true. I mean, a lot of these institutions have been corrupted in the West now, and I'm sure they're relying on sources which seem authoritative, like MI6 and the CIA and whatever. But these organizations, these intelligence agencies, are purveyors of falsehoods, and I think the Economist is only happy to go along. Maybe they half believe it because they want to believe it, and then they may think that this is an exaggeration, maybe in their more honest moments, but they want to stick it to the Russians, so they're going to play along with it.
I also just don't understand, what is the game plan for the Western leaders in NATO? Like, why are they so dead set on keeping this going? It's so clear that Ukraine can't win this war on its own. And just like you're saying before, there is no appetite to invoke Article 5. There's no appetite for the Europeans to actually go to war with Russia. And even Zelensky himself has said that we need to do another peace summit, and this time we need the Russians. Like, he's admitting that but at least there's some sign that he knows that things are bad and that they need to come with some dialogue. And then Viktor Orban, president of Hungary, talks to Zelensky and then talks to Putin on a mission for peace, says we need diplomacy. War in Europe is horrible. We can't have this on our doorstep. We need to end this now. NATO loses its mind. Brussels is freaking out. Like, he wasn't mandated to do this. He's not allowed to. He's doing the one thing that I think almost everybody in Europe, in terms of the population, agrees makes sense. Start talking. Let's stop shooting, because everybody's dying, especially the Ukrainians. If we want to save Ukraine, let's talk. Let's talk, and let's get diplomacy. So what is the plan for NATO? Do they don't have a plan?
I don't know if they really have it. Yeah, I don't think they have a plan. It's clear that they miscalculated at the beginning of this, right? They thought, again, they were going to cause the collapse of the Russian government, and it's so far from true. So now they're stuck with it, and they're just in panic mode, and they can't think clearly. You would think that there would be some real efforts to crank up production, increase military budgets, all this hawkish talk coming from leaders, but there's really nothing of substance to back it up. For example, in Britain, I think I mentioned earlier that they increased the defense budget from 2.3% to 2.5%. If you really think you're on, the doorstep of World War III, is that what you do? But that's just pretty much what you find, throughout Europe. It's just there isn't a plan. There's no substance behind it, but there's a lot of wild talk. I just don't think. I think part of it is they just have trouble believing that they could lose, right? I mean, we are NATO. We are the West. We don't lose. And so it's only a matter of will, right? That's what a lot of the talk. We can't, and that's, and sticking together and being united. And, that was Orban's great sin, is that he dissented, right? He went and he spoke with another voice, and this causes fury. This idea that we just need to circle the wagons and then somehow we'll just get through this. But it's not right. It's not clear thinking. It's just an instinctive.
Ukraine isn't even NATO. That's the thing. That's also it shows their true colors as well. Like, this is a proxy war that that clearly that is more complicated than people realize. That this is more of a civil war within Ukraine, and they're being crushed between the NATO forcing to go forward and Russia. And it's like it's just not fair to the Ukrainians. Yeah. And what's your plan? Your plan is what? Just to keep it going right now because you don't have any plan, and so you're just going to let more and more Ukrainians die. there's no other solution here other than for Ukraine
Right.
to lose, engage diplomacy, or let more Ukrainians die
Yeah.
and more territory be lost. It's like
Right.
this isn't. It shouldn't be difficult to come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
And also, it seems like if a politician does come to this conclusion and makes these moves, he's going to get popular support. It's a good platform to run on. So it's like,
Right.
just for your own political survival, why don't you start being rational? Because people don't want a wider war with Russia. That's why I think Viktor Orban, Hungary's not a big country, but he's punching way above his weight just because he's the only one that's
Right.
willing to do this. And I think it's going to be well received, maybe not within the establishment media and NATO and all this, but within the global world, the global South.
Oh,
and
yeah.
everybody's like, this is the man that's actually moving towards peace. And I think Viktor Orban's went to Beijing as well.
Yeah.
Like, he's making moves.
I think that's
he's
where
like,
he is now.
right. So it's like, just if you are a savvy politician, to do it. You think that these political leaders would be smart and have some backbone and be able to like really do it. They're just so spineless. They just all stick together, and we will all save
Yeah.
NATO and wave
Yeah.
our Ukrainian
Right.
flags, and everything
Right.
will be good. It's like,
Right. Well, it just
can't
shows
you
that,
use your brain?
Yeah, it just shows there is some rot, in the system, more than some rot. The system is
hive
deeply,
mind.
deeply rotten. I mean, just that the kind of people that rise to the top are not, are people who are seen to be incapable of really independent thought and independent analysis. They're administrators, they're people that just kind of enforce the rules, and they can't imagine, actually changing the rules. I mean, they're just those kind of people, and and they're part of they're part of the hive. They can't imagine actually stepping outside of what's considered to be acceptable discourse. Well, they see what happens to people, that do, like Orban. They get, they're excoriated, or we can talk about this later. What happened to Le Pen or something, because it's just the whole establishment. Even if the popular support is there, it's just the establishment has a lot of power, and it will go after you. You're just like it's like an immune system kicking into overdrive to drive out some sort of pathogen. They regard you as a pathogen if you actually venture out from the carefully defined, limited scope of discourse.
Right, but you're also rewarded if you do, because
But you have to be
resonate.
right. You have to be a brave kind of person with a spine, and that's just not the kind of people that we have. I mean, that's just clear. I wonder about that too. But it's clear that we just don't have those kind of people at the top. That they're weeded out. There seems to be a system that just weeds out those kind of people early on, and we end up with these spineless administrators. That's all we have in the West.
Politicians are just so gross. Schultz is probably
Schultz
the worst.
is he's just a human worm.
Yeah, who lets their ally blow up their own pipeline
Right,
and triple
right.
energy prices in your own country? Like, what a turd! You're supposed to be looking out for your people. You have no.
Right.
What kind of German are you?
Yeah.
Well,
you see, there was recently a poll that came out that showed that 0%, not 1%, but 0% of Germans what was it exactly? Are actually very satisfied with the way Germany is being governed. Okay, there are something like 15% that are somewhat satisfied, but there's 0% that are very satisfied.
Yeah, that 15% on the payroll of the German government.
Yeah, probably.
That's why. That it's about. It is true when you think about like the power of these states and why they can have so much weight. That we don't want to forget. Is that. There are a lot of people that are on the payroll of the state, and as the state grows, it gets more and more people on their payroll, which insulates itself further and further. It makes it become more of a parasite, but also a stronger parasite.
Yeah.
It's something that I kind of realized here in the United States. I'm like, how can anybody support some of these policies or doing all these things? It's like, well,
if
you'll be
you're
surprised if there's millions of people that are getting a lot of money because
if your job depends on it,
Right.
you'll probably support it.
Yeah. Okay, well, you mentioned Le Pen for.
You had a question also about Gaza. Why the
Okay, so we want
there. I can go over that quickly, and then we can.
Okay,
go
let's
to Le
do
Pen.
Gaza. Sure.
Right. What it was that you're talking about was a study done by the British medical journal, probably the most prestigious British medical journal, Lancet, and what they found was it's actually something that we discussed a couple of weeks ago. I said inevitably the death figures are going to rise because what's being reported are direct deaths, people that have been shot or blown up by Israeli weapons. But in war, the majority of deaths are always indirect. People that starve to death, people who die because they can't get medical care, people who die because the water has been contaminated as a result of the war and they contract some disease, that kind of thing. That's always the majority of deaths. To give you an example, in Iraq, approximately 100,000 people were killed directly by the war, but anywhere from 700,000 to 1 million died as a result of the war. The excess mortalities were on the order of a million, and that's because the infrastructure, was just utterly obliterated in Iraq. There was chaos, and so there were many more deaths than those that were caused by bullets and bombs. So this is what they're looking at, those other deaths, the indirect deaths. And what they said is that typically in a war, the number of indirect deaths from the war are anywhere from 3 to 15 times the direct deaths. They actually chose a very, very conservative factor. They decided that it was 4 times in the case of Gaza. So it's now, I think when they did the study, it was maybe at 37,000, and then multiply that by 4, and you end up with 108. And then you add the indirect deaths to the direct deaths, and you get 186,000. So that's what they're estimating, like as of a month ago, I think. Of course, it could be even worse, because people say like those direct deaths may be even higher than we know, because there are people who could be buried under the rubble and so forth. These are just like our known direct deaths. And again, they chose a very, very conservative
number
factor of 4. You could easily, like in the case of Iraq, it was more like 7 or 10. If they took 10, then you end up with 380,000 plus 38,000. You get over 400,000. Anyway, their very conservative estimate puts it as like the 8% of the population of Gaza has already died as a result of the war.
That's horrifying. Just in the case of Iraq, when you said that maybe up to 1 million excess deaths, that was the result of our actions, what we did in Iraq. Yeah. So were we deliberately targeting, infrastructure that was, like what we weren't copper bombing cities like Gaza was doing, right? Were we hitting their water and their,
that's my understanding. It was unlike the Russians, who didn't actually hit any infrastructure at all until well into the war. A lot of people were wondering what they're doing. It's like from day one, actually, that's what we started with. We first went out after their air defense system, military installations, but then their electrical infrastructure, their water infrastructure, all kinds of things. And this just, resulted in just kind of a total breakdown of services that helped to keep people alive.
Was there an outcry from the rest of the world that we were
there was some, causing? There was certainly criticism of our effort. George W. Bush was not very popular in Europe, so there was criticism, but nothing on the order. Look, immediately Russia was treated as a pariah, as a leper by the West, and sanctioned and ostracized, and of course that didn't happen to the U.S. Nobody sanctioned the U.S. It's absurd to even mention it. Nothing like that happened. There was criticism, from certain parties and governments within Europe, but nothing like what we saw directed against Russia.
Yeah, it's crazy that we got away with it. That there was no real evidence of Iraq doing anything. That it was a bunch of,
Right. Well, yeah,
We
no,
just
it was
destroyed that whole country,
right.
and nobody said anything.
Right.
We couldn't do that now. I think people are more aware. I
Yeah,
think it's
maybe I don't
it's a
know,
different time.
but even earlier there was the economic sanctions that were placed on Iraq that result in the death of 500,000 Iraqi children. And
Right.
the
That's that famous
comment
right.
from Madeleine Albright. Say, well, yes, you got to do what you got to do. She said it's not exactly what she said, but sometimes you
Right.
have
She
to pay
says
the price.
we think
Yeah,
right. We think the price is worth it.
Yeah,
she's
right.
saying.
Yeah, and that was horrific. It was just absolutely horrific. That caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, and especially of children in Iraq. And there was just very little attention paid to it. Some people are aware of it, but the vast majority of Americans and Westerners aren't even aware of it. It's just not newsworthy to them. But
Right.
we'll be talking about the so-called deliberate attack on the children's hospital probably for weeks.
Right. Well, I'm just trying to. What was the justification for striking the water infrastructure in Iraq? Because I thought the idea was that we were going to bring democracy and liberate these people, not starve them. I mean, wasn't the operation called something like, never-ending freedom or something
Iraqi
ridiculous
freedom,
like
I
that?
think,
Yeah. Right.
Well, the argument is that a lot of infrastructure is dual use. You say, okay, yeah, it's used by the civilians, but it's also used by the military. So if we deprive this, the use of this to the military, well, it's too bad the civilians have to suffer, but it's part of the war effort and part of destroying their military capability. Yeah, I should actually look into exactly what they struck, but they did much more than just the energy infrastructure, which is what Russia has been focusing on after a long delay of actually not going after it, and then they decided they had to.
Yeah, it's such a horrific war and event, and I realize I know very little about it. I think most people know very little about it. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, the Middle East, it's complicated. Things are always popping off over there. It's a bunch of terrorists, and there's bad guys and we're good guys, and that's about as far as most people think, and that's basically what I thought for most of my life as well. So I'm not faulting anybody for thinking that, but then once you start to see like, well, wait, how many kids died? 500,000 for what? And then another million died for what? What did Iraq do exactly? They didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They weren't involved in 9/11 at all. But we killed millions of them, and we don't even say sorry.
Right.
It's
just complicated. It was, it's right. There's obviously a glaring double standard. It's just that all our bombs are love bombs or something. They're dropped with the best of intentions. Occasionally bad things happen. Life is complicated, and the same thing goes for Israel, right? But Russian missiles are deliberately, target children's hospitals and maternity hospitals and so forth.
Yeah, I was I think only in middle school when 9/11 happened, and I remember being patriotic when we changed all of our menus to freedom fries and freedom toast and singing "I'm proud to be an American," where at least I'm free. Right. A lot of it's like they could sweep people up.
Yeah, one thing I just want to mention about that, I mean, of course, the reason that we spoke of freedom fries is that this was targeting the French, who were not going along with our plans, and that actually, again, shows you how things have changed. It used to be that there were independent voices in Europe, and especially the French. They were not part of NATO until not too long ago. But all of Europe seems to have become just a colony of the United States. I mean, the neocons really have succeeded in subjugating the Europeans, the European elites.
We'll see how long that lasts.
So anyway, maybe we can talk about the French election and the British election.
Well, let me
briefly.
go back. Sorry, we got on such a tangent. I wanted to talk a little bit more about Gaza. So 180. So we had that number 186,000. Also, there was another story that I saw that broke through Haaretz, something that we've talked about multiple times before, and I know Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone done great work on this. Talking about the Hannibal Directive that was enacted on October 7th. And the Hannibal Directive is the idea that we won't let our civilians, our soldiers be taken prisoner. We will kill our own men rather than for them to become hostages in Gaza. And Haaretz actually wrote this story. And Haaretz, correct me if I'm wrong, is pretty much the leading newspaper in Israel. It's not a scrub newspaper.
Right.
This is like the New York Times of Israel. So this is something
it's certainly
that,
one of the leading. It may be the leading. It's known as being liberal left, but it is within the establishment. It's at the liberal left end of the of the Israeli spectrum. But it's not. It's certainly not fringe. Certainly not what you call really a dissident publication.
right. So this is something that has a big impact on society within Israel, and they just released. Yeah, because a lot of people will read it in Israel, and we'll see how they take it. But they've done their own research, and they were talked about this before, that it looks like the Hannibal Directive was enacted, and IDF tanks were shooting into kibbutzes because they thought Hamas people were there, just blowing up the whole kibbutz, and they had a free fire zone for any vehicles heading that were in that area close to the Gaza border. They just blew up everything. Right. And there are reports saying that maybe 50% of the deaths, maybe half or more potentially, of Israeli deaths were actually committed by the IDF themselves.
Right.
Now, my question is more, how is this going to impact Israeli society? If Haaretz itself is saying this, like, okay, maybe you don't give a damn that 186,000 Gazans are dead. You want it all, kill them all, whatever. But if you see your own government is willing to, let's call it what it is, it's not the Hannibal Directive, is straight up murder, a state-sponsored murder of its own citizens. How would you feel as a citizen of that country if you know that your country will so quickly enact a policy like this? You're talking about save the hostages and bring them back. It's like, well, the majority of the hostages were killed on October 7th by the IDF. So it has to be making shockwaves through Israeli society. How can they be proud of their government to say that our government would do this? That they would kill its own citizens so willingly. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to guess. I'm not. I'm not an expert on Israeli politics or Israeli society, but I doubt that it's going to have a very large impact. And I say that partly because the Hannibal Directive has been around for a while, that people have known about it for years, and it has been enforced in the past. And to my knowledge, it hasn't created, I'm sure it's outraged certain sectors of Israeli society, but not overall. In general, there's a lot of support for the IDF. The IDF is a highly respected institution, and I think they trust them to make the right decision. And they would say that this was a difficult decision for them to make, but they had to do it for whatever reason. That's what I think is going to happen.
Really?
Yeah. We'll see. We'll watch it. We'll see if the story starts to have some kind of an impact, but I doubt that it will.
Okay. Well, that's a shame, because I was thinking this is good. It's breaking in the mainstream that, hey, the Israeli government is out of control and they were responsible for a lot of the deaths on October 7th. That should cause outrage, right? You'd think it would. In a normal society, it should.
Right, but I think it's broken through in Haaretz, and and the Haaretz readers will know about it. I have the feeling that there's going to be a code of silence about it outside of that, that particular sector, and it's going to be less than 20% of the population. The rest of them are not going to hear about it, or if they hear about it, it's only going to be with a certain spin and say it's those terrible lefties that are saying this, and don't listen. And I bet 80% of the people in Israel it won't really get through to them.
Oh, okay.
I hope to be proven wrong, but that's my cynical assessment.
Okay. We can move over to France real quick. So this election did not go very well for Le Pen. Actually, she was looking pretty hot over the first round, making some real waves. And then from my understanding, it's basically like the socialists teamed up with the capitalists, Macron, to make sure that Le Pen didn't win.
Right.
Do you want
to
really dive into it for me?
Yeah. Well, it is really bizarre. I mean, we talked about that. There's, we said there's kind of a Le Pen derangement syndrome, and in France. So it's and it leads to these very strange political bedmates. You would think that like what Macron is all about is capitalism, right? But he it doesn't seem to be where the what they really are all about. That's okay. That's important to them, but it seems secondary. It's because they made a pact with the devil. Mélenchon, who's the leader of the leftists, is truly far left. I mean, I don't think it's even right to call Le Pen far right. She's just habitually, referred to as far right by the mainstream media. But to call him far left, I think, is fair. It's not that he's just for, more government programs. He's really for, thoroughgoing socialism in France. He wants to create a socialist society, and is therefore very tightly allied with the communists in France. And this is the guy who now leads, he leads this new coalition, the Popular Front, that proved victorious. And it's all thanks to Macron, and his people who just would rather have socialists running the country, or, well, I guess they're maybe not exactly running the country, but give them the lion's share of the power than have Le Pen and restrictive immigration policies and a more moderate stance in relation to Russia.
You think that would be, other than maybe the Russia thing, that the Front National, Marine Le Pen's party, would be more aligned with Macron's party than Macron's party would be aligned with the socialists or the far left, right?
Well, it's kind of funny. It's actually Le Pen's party is, it's not socialist, but it's not really capitalist either. They're in favor of a great deal of government intervention and, and a certain amount of wealth redistribution and that kind of thing. I mean, you could say there are maybe in some cases, there's more similarity between her, especially there are elements of the leftist coalition that, for example, including Mélenchon himself, who is for achieving some sort of modus vivendi with Russia, and wants to stop the support for Project Ukraine. So there are people like that on the left who would agree with her on foreign policy, at least vis-a-vis Russia. And then there's a lot of them have Mélenchon is much farther left, is much more of a socialist than Le Pen is. But some of the groups within his coalition probably have a very similar economic program to that of the National Rally, Le Pen's party. So it's actually not clear, but I think you're right, that it's certainly, you've actually seen, for example, the euro has dropped significantly since this leftist victory. It makes the finance people worried about, the fiscal soundness of France, because it's already, France, like the U.S., has incurred a great deal of debt. And, if the leftist takes charge, that's only going to get worse, right? And Le Pen is probably, has certainly not an advocate of austerity, but it's going to have a more moderate economic policy. But that doesn't seem to be what really matters. It's just somehow stopping Le Pen, and maybe they really do believe she's a crypto-fascist or something, and that this is going to be the road to Auschwitz. It's just that's the only way. Because they had very, very strange bedfellows. I mean, basically, this is how they pulled off this victory is that these two parties, the capitalists and the socialists, the far leftists and Macron's people, the globalist capitalists, got together and just went from district to district and figured out, how they could combine their forces to defeat Le Pen in every district where it could be done, and they managed to pull it off. Again, she had the most votes overall, but she ended up being third place because she was against because the establishment banded together and coordinated their efforts. And the establishment, the left, and the Macron's people combined were a more powerful force than her party by itself.
Okay, so what does this mean for France, for Europe, NATO, Ukraine? What does this spell?
Well, it's hard to. I think you'd have to say that it means that France is just going to be less of a factor overall, because France is looking at a chaotic future right now. Nobody's really in charge. You have Macron as president, but if we follow president, then it should be Mélenchon as prime minister, and that's going to be a really strange pair right there. The two of them are, they made this pact with each other, but they're just opposites in so many ways. And you just don't know how this country is actually going to hold together. In foreign policy, I would say that Macron has been weakened, because Mélenchon, again, it does not support his Napoleonic foreign policy. And he's also very much opposed to the support for Israel, too. He said that he would, if he could, he would recognize Palestine as a state. Now, I don't know if he has the power to do that. Again, his party, though it has, came in first, does not have a majority. It's just a plurality. And Macron still has the presidency. So we're going to have a country that's just, kind of in the, maybe I shouldn't say civil war, but it's just going to be unable to present any sort of coherent policy vis-a-vis the rest of the world. It's just, we're looking at chaos in France. So I think that's probably going to be, at least weaken support overall for Project Ukraine, just because we before we had Macron kind of leading the charge, right, for a more aggressive policy vis-a-vis Russia, and it's going to be harder for him to do that.
What do you say there's going to be chaos in France? Are you just talking about political chaos, or are you talking about on the streets chaos?
Well, it's definitely political chaos. There could be on the streets chaos. Knowing France, political chaos, politics get played out on the streets all the time. So, even with the victory here, when it looked like when actually in the first round, when Le Pen's party did so well, the National Rally, there were riots protesting it. Now, the far left one, there were riots celebrating the victory. So, who knows what's going to happen. The French.
Yeah, riots if you win, riots if you don't. It's just,
right.
Okay, yeah, it seems like the whole West is falling into turmoil. We're just seeing it one after another. We're not looking too hot here in the United States.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, all these governments really very weak, and I think it's just true all around.
Except for Orban, I feel like, and maybe Meloni
actually,
a little bit in Italy.
That's right. The only thing, his weakness is that he's part of the European Union that is doing whatever it can to undermine him. But within his own country, he's very popular. It shows that a populist president, who really firmly pursues these populist policies is popular. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, it's just like I still can't get over how these politicians operate. If it was me, first of all, I'd like to think that I'd be rational and ethical enough to come to these conclusions on my own. But even if I was too stupid,
right?
Look over to the guy that's kicking butt in the polls. He's like, I'm going to do what that guy's doing. Yeah. Instead, they're like, no, I'm just going to double down on these bad policies and see if I can get down to single digits before my term ends.
Right. Well, I think a lot of these people are just, it's short term. They're just thinking, okay, we don't have a plan, but let's just keep things going to the next election. That's probably what the Biden administration is thinking, though they may not even do that.
Yeah, I saw something that just today that Biden told Congress he's not stepping down. He's not in. So I think it's going to get messy here in the U.S. It's going to. They might try to force him out, and we'll see how that works, and if he goes willingly, and if not, there's going to be. There'll be lots to talk about. We're in for a hot summer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we can end it here unless there's anything else you want to add.
That's fine. Yeah. Now we covered a lot of topics here.
Yeah, that's where there's a lot to. We jumped around a lot today, which is fine. Okay. All right, then. Well, have a good rest of your day, Dad.
Okay. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.